They say the wilderness doesn't forget. It remembers every footstep, every whispered prayer, every heart that breaks beneath its trees. In the winter of 1847, a quiet man named Elias Granger lived alone among the pines of Brookridge, where the snow fell thicker than conversation, and the wind was the only voice that answered back. He wasn't searching for love, he wasn't chasing redemption, but somewhere between the silence of his cabin walls and the ache he'd buried deep, a stranger arrived with nothing but a secret and the kind of courage that doesn't come easy, and in that cold, forgotten corner of the world, a family began. The year was 1847, and deep within the untamed frontier of Northmere territory, a solitary man named Elias Granger swung his axe into an old cedar with practiced strength. Wood chips flew like sparks from a fire, and the forest echoed with the thud of metal against bark. Elias wiped his brow, his breath misting in the crisp air. This forest, vast and silent, was the only witness to his lonely rituals. 3 winters had passed since Elias built his cabin beyond the old pine ridge, far from the scattered settlements of Northmere. Men often came west with hopes of land, wives, and children. Elias had come for silence, and stayed for the same reason. Each night by the flickering hearth, he whispered prayers no one answered, not even the wind. The logging camp a few miles downriver stirred at dawn. Laughter, boots crunching frost, and stories of families echoed among the men. Elias would join them for labor, but never for supper. Frank Denley, the camp cook, often asked, "Elias, supper with us tonight. Molly's baking again." And every time Elias offered a quiet excuse. He couldn't explain how the warmth of their fire only made his solitude colder. His axe never wavered. Every tree he felled landed with mathematical precision. Some men called him the ghost cutter, not just for his quietness, but for how he read the forest as though it spoke only to him. Yet no tree ever asked him about the emptiness in his chest. No blade of grass noticed the way he lingered at sunset, as if waiting for someone who never arrived. That afternoon, Elias walked the muddy trail into Wickham's Hollow, the nearest town. Once a month he made the trip, for flour, tobacco, salt, and nails. The Saturday market was always busy, full of smells he no longer recognized and faces that blurred together. But this time, something halted him mid-step. A voice. "Celine, hurry now!" a gruff man shouted near the blacksmith's. Elias turned to see a girl. No, a young woman, jerked by the arm by a ragged man who could only be her father. The bruises on her wrist told more than the man's words. Her hair was neatly braided, her dress faded and patched, but it was her eyes, green, wide, and oddly composed, that struck Elias the most. She stood still, not out of fear, but defiance, dulled by weariness. The man, Barrett Mullen, the name echoed in whispers from the townsfolk, began addressing the crowd. 17, strong, obedient, knows how to cook, sew, chop kindling, ready for marriage if any man's got coin and a conscience. Elias's gut twisted. People murmured, but no one moved to stop the sale. $40 to start, Barrett barked. A rancher offered 45. Someone else mumbled, 50. Barrett grinned like a man about to drown, who'd finally seen a boat. Then Elias heard himself speak. 60. Silence fell. Barrett blinked, uncertain. The girl, Celine, looked at Elias as if trying to read not his face, but his soul. "I'm not buying," Elias said, stepping closer. "I'm offering marriage, but only if she agrees." Barrett sneered, but the weight had shifted. Celine's voice, steady despite the chaos, answered, "Yes." They left Wickham's Hollow together, 2 strangers bound not by romance or law, but necessity and a shared wordless understanding of what it meant to be alone. Too long. That night, Elias sat across from her in his cabin, 2 bowls of stew steaming between them. He didn't ask her story. Not yet. But as the fire crackled, for the first time in years, Elias didn't speak to the flames. He listened instead, to her quiet breaths, to the way her shoulders slowly relaxed. In that silence, something shifted. Not hope, not yet, but the soft echo of something returning to life. The morning after bringing Celine Mullen to his cabin, Elias awoke before dawn, as he always did. But this time, the steady rhythm of his morning, coffee, boots, axe, was broken by the sound of quiet breathing from the other room. For a long moment, he stood motionless by the hearth, listening. It had been years since he heard the sound of another soul sleeping nearby. It startled him more than any bear ever had. Celine was already stirring when he pushed the door open. She stood at the wash basin, her hands red from the cold water, trying to scrub the memory of yesterday from her skin. Her face was pale, lips drawn tight, but her posture remained proud. She greeted Elias with a quiet, "Good morning," as if they had been living together for years. "You don't need to do chores," he said, handing her a clean towel. This isn't something you owe me." Celine looked at him, tired, eyes sharp. "I wasn't raised to sit idle. Work steadies my mind." He didn't argue. Instead, he watched as she began cleaning the floors, wiping the windows, folding worn blankets. Each task was done with care, like she was trying to make the cabin her own without assuming she had the right. Elias busied himself outside, chopping wood in short, vicious bursts, trying to make sense of what had happened and what was to come. At midday, they ate in silence. Only the fire dared speak, its crackling filling the space between them. Finally, as dusk set in and the shadows lengthened on the log, "Walls?" Selina sat down across from Elias and folded her hands. "I need to tell you something," she said. He looked up. "I figured as much." Her fingers trembled slightly as she spoke. "My father didn't say everything. He never does. He left out the part he thinks ruins me." She paused, swallowing the words before forcing them out. "I'm with child. I didn't choose it. It wasn't love. It was taken." The silence after was heavier than snow on an old roof. Elias said nothing for a long while. He only stared at the wood grains on the table, tracing lines with his eyes that never led anywhere. Finally, he asked, "Do you want the baby?" "I didn't at first," Celine whispered. "But now, I think I do. It didn't ask for this. It didn't do anything wrong." Elias stood and crossed to the window. Outside, the pine trees stood firm, unmoved by the storm brewing in their hearts. "I've lived here 15 winters," he said, "and every night I prayed for a family. I never imagined it would come to me like this. But maybe this is the answer." Celine turned to him, skeptical. "You're not angry?" "No." He met her eyes. "Just surprised. But that child needs a father, and I've got more. Room in this cabin, and my life than I know what to do with." A tear slipped down Celine's cheek. Not from sadness, not fully. Relief had a sharp edge when you weren't used to safety. "I can stay?" she asked, almost afraid of the answer. "You're not a guest, Celine," Elias said. "You're my wife, and this is your home now. You both belong here." That night, while the wind moaned outside, Elias fetched a bundle of pine he'd been saving for a carving project. With slow, patient hands, he began whittling it into something new, a cradle. His calloused fingers shaped the wood by firelight, not out of obligation, but quiet anticipation. Celine watched him from the rocking chair, her hands cradling her belly. No more words were needed. Winter was coming fast. But for the first time in years, Elias Granger didn't dread it. The wind began its slow howl through the Brookridge pines before the first snowflake touched the ground. It was a quiet warning, one Elias knew how to read. Winter was no longer a distant notion. It was coming fast, thick with frost and unforgiving silence. And now, for the first time, he wasn't alone to face it. Inside the cabin, Celine moved with increasing confidence. She adjusted to the rhythms of mountain life with a grace that surprised even herself. Her belly grew round beneath her thick shawl, and with it came small aches, unexpected kicks, and long nights spent staring at the ceiling, counting fears like stars. But she never complained. She worked even when tired, baking bread, sewing tiny garments from scraps of old linens, and humming songs Elias didn't recognize but loved hearing anyway. Elias, in turn, busied himself with preparations. He chopped wood relentlessly, often until his arms trembled and the axe handle nearly slipped from his hands. He repaired the roof twice, sealed the windows with tree resin, and built a stronger door. He had lived through 15 winters, but none with 2 hearts to protect. That changed everything. One morning, as the first frost hardened the soil, Celine stood on the cabin porch, holding a steaming mug with both hands. Elias approached, wiping sap from his fingers. "Something on your mind?" he asked. She hesitated. "People will talk, won't they? About me, about the baby." "They already do," Elias replied. "Not unkindly, but what they say doesn't change what's true inside this house." Celine looked down at her belly. "They'll say you're a fool, that you took in damaged goods." Elias stepped beside her. "Let them." He looked out across the pine-covered hills. "I've worked with men who spit poison because they hate their own lives. They won't build my home for me. They won't raise this child. We will." She nodded, pressing the mug to her lips. The steam curled around her face, hiding the fragile hope in her eyes. Days later, 3 riders came up the path. Tom Enders, Jacob Rees, and Matthew Bly, men Elias had worked with at the mill in Stillwater. Their faces were carved from concern and quiet judgment. Celine watched from behind the curtain as Elias stepped outside to greet them. "We've heard things," Tom began, not bothering with pleasantries. "About her, about the baby." Elias crossed his arms. "Not sure what business that is of yours." "It's not, strictly," Jacob added, "but people talk. It's not sitting right with some of the wives. They're saying it looks improper." Matthew, the youngest, avoided Elias's gaze. "We just thought, maybe it'd be best if you laid low until spring." Elias's jaw tensed. He had known this would come, but hearing it still stung like cold metal. "I've earned my place up here, paid for this land with years of sweat. You think I'm going to crawl because someone's uncomfortable?" Jacob spoke again. "Eli, we like you, but if this spreads, it could cost you your work. I'll find another way." "And what about when she goes into labor?" Tom pressed. "That baby comes early. You won't get her down the mountain in time. No doctors out here. What if something goes wrong?" Elias didn't respond at first. His gaze drifted toward the window, where Celine stood behind the glass, one hand over her belly. Then he turned back to the men. "She's not going anywhere," he said, "and neither am I." The men exchanged glances, then turned their horses and rode away. They hadn't come to help. They came to warn, and perhaps to judge. Elias didn't care. Later that night, Celine curled beside the fire with her mending while Elias rocked gently in his chair, whittling another piece of pine into the shape of a bird. Silence wrapped around them like a second quilt. "I heard them," she said softly. Elias paused, knife in midair. "Doesn't matter." She looked up at him. "It does, a little." He exhaled. "What matters is we're here, together, and we'll get through whatever comes next, one day at a time." Outside, snow began falling in thin, glittering sheets. Inside, the hearth glowed with steady warmth, and for a while, the bitterness of the world stayed. Outside, the wind that blew across the hills of Brookridge that morning carried more than snow. It carried footsteps from the past, bitter and familiar. Elias knew something was wrong the moment he heard the horse gallop into the clearing like a warning shot. He dropped his saw and turned toward the trail. Barrett Mullen was back. Celine's pale face appeared at the window. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against the glass, her pregnant form casting a long shadow on the cabin wall. Elias had prayed this day wouldn't come, but he had known deep down that Barrett's greed would outweigh his shame. It was only a matter of time. "Granger!" Barrett's voice cracked like a whip through the forest air. "Get out here! I didn't finish my business with you. Elias stepped onto the porch without haste. His breath clouded the cold air. Barrett sat atop a mud-splattered horse, his clothes torn, his face unshaven, and his eyes bloodshot with rage or rotgut or both. He looked like a man clinging to the last ledge of dignity with fingers too numb to hold on. "You were paid," Elias said calmly. "You left. That should have been the end of it." "I want more," Barrett spat. "That girl's been nothing but trouble. You deserve compensation. She's not a transaction." Barrett dismounted, stumbling a little, then swaggered toward the porch. "You don't even know whose brat she's carrying, do you?" he hissed, a vile grin spreading across his cracked lips. "Could be that stable Hans. Could be that peddler who came through last summer. Hell, could even be mine." The words hit like ice water on Elias's spine. Behind him, he heard Selene's sharp intake of breath, then silence, the kind that screams louder than sound. Barrett saw the hesitation in Elias's face and drove the wedge deeper. "You're raising someone else's shame," Barrett sneered, "and I bet the whole damn town's laughing about it already." Other men were beginning to arrive, drawn by the noise. Elias saw faces he recognized: loggers, farmers, a few shopkeepers from Stillwater. They lingered at the tree line like crows, waiting for spectacle. "I don't care whose blood that child carries," Elias said, his voice low and deliberate. "That baby is mine because I'll raise it. Selene is my wife because I chose her, and if any man here doubts that, let him step forward and say it to my face." Barrett sneered. "So noble. You really think honor matters when the baby's born looking nothing like you?" Jacob Rees, who had once shared stew and pipe smoke with Elias on long logging nights, laughed bitterly. "Man's got a point. You'll be the town's fool come spring." Elias stepped off the porch, slow and steady. "Then let them laugh, but if anyone lays a hand on my wife or child or spreads poison under my roof, there won't be a second warning." Barrett pulled a rusted knife from his belt. The crowd stiffened. In a blink, Elias closed the gap and seized Barrett's wrist, the sound of bone grinding beneath, calloused. Fingers silencing everyone. The knife dropped into the snow. "You're done here," Elias growled, gripping tighter. "You come back, I won't stop at words." He released the man, who stumbled backward, nursing his bruised pride and wrist. The crowd, suddenly less curious, began to disperse, murmuring into the wind as they vanished into the pines. Barrett mounted his horse with difficulty. "This ain't over, Granger," he spat. "Yes, it is," Elias replied. When the last hoofbeat faded into the trees, Elias turned to the doorway. Selene stood there, one hand on the frame, the other protectively over. Her belly, her cheeks were wet with tears she hadn't even noticed falling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted to bring that man back into our lives." Elias walked to her, placed a hand over hers on her belly, and looked into her eyes. "He doesn't get to define us. Not now, not ever." The storm had come and passed, but the damage, subtle and internal, lingered like a bruise beneath the skin. That night they sat by the fire, saying little, but Elias held her hand, and Selene didn't pull away. And in the quiet crackle of the hearth, a promise stood, unspoken, but ironclad. The wind howled like a wounded beast the night it happened. It rattled the shutters and whistled through the chimney, but inside the cabin, all Elias Granger could hear was Selene's scream. It sliced through the dark like a blade. He was out of bed before he could think, heart pounding with the unmistakable knowledge. The baby was coming. Selene lay curled on the edge of their straw-filled mattress, clutching her belly with white-knuckled hands. Her skin gleamed with sweat, and her face contorted with a pain Elias could neither ease nor fully comprehend. "It's too soon," she gasped. I thought we had more time." Elias lit the oil lamp with trembling hands, his mind racing. They'd made a plan for this. If her labor began early, he was to ride for help. But that plan had relied on decent weather. Now snow choked the trails, and the creek was a ribbon of ice. "Doctor," Maynard in Stillwater might as well have been on the far side of the world. "There's no time!" Celine cried, her breath coming in shallow bursts. "You have to help me." "I will," Elias said, voice low but firm. "I'm right here." He'd studied the doctor's book until the pages wore soft in his fingers. But now, staring down at the woman he loved writhing in pain, the diagrams and notes felt like a child's drawings. He fetched warm water, laid out the clean linens, whispered reassurances that barely passed the lump in his throat. Celine gritted her teeth. "Talk to me," she pleaded, "about anything." Elias nodded, grabbing her hand. "The cradle's ready. I finished the little carvings last week. There's a squirrel and a pine cone. You said you liked those. It's sanded smooth and the rocking legs don't creak. It's waiting in the corner, by the fire." Selene moaned through another contraction. Her grip crushed his fingers, but Elias didn't flinch. He leaned closer. "You're not alone, Celine. I'm with you. We're doing this together." Time bent and twisted around them. The fire crackled, the snow fell, and pain became the measure of the hours. Celine screamed again. This one, guttural, raw. Then came a new sound, silence, a terrifying, heavy silence. Elias leaned forward, heart hammering. "What is it, Celine?" Her eyes opened wide. "Something's wrong. It doesn't feel right. I can't." Panic rose in Elias like a flood. "What do you need? Tell me." "Help me sit up," she gasped. I think the baby's stuck." Elias moved behind her, holding her up with strong arms as she shifted. His hands were slick with sweat and fear. "You're doing great. Just breathe. We'll get through this." She gave a choked sob. "I'm so scared, Elias." "I know," he whispered. "But look at me. We've survived worse, you and I. You're stronger than any storm." Suddenly, Selene cried out with a force that made Elias flinch. He looked and saw it, the tiny crown of a head, hair wet and dark. "I see her," he cried. "She's almost here." Selene bore down, her strength pouring into the push. Elias guided with trembling hands, shoulders, arms, and then, in a final surge of blood and fluid, the baby slipped into his arms. The room went silent again. The newborn was motionless. For one dreadful second, Elias thought he might break. Then, a sound. A high, angry wail tore from the infant's lungs and filled the cabin with life. "She's crying," Elias gasped. "She's crying!" Celine collapsed backward, sobbing with exhaustion and joy. Elias wrapped the tiny girl in the soft cloth Celine had stitched from old flannel. He carried her to Celine's chest, eyes stinging. "She's perfect," he said, voice breaking. "She's here. You did it." The baby nuzzled against Celine, her cries softening. Elias knelt beside them, overcome. "What do we call her?" Celine whispered. Elias reached out, brushing the baby's cheek. "Hope," he said softly. "Her name is Hope." As the storm raged, beyond the cabin walls, a new light glowed within. The longest night had delivered the greatest miracle, and as Elias wrapped his arms around the two lives that now gave his own meaning, he realized this wasn't just survival anymore. It was the beginning of something beautiful. The snow melted slowly that year, reluctant to surrender its grip on the hills of Brookridge, but when it did, it came in great sighs, the sound of ice giving way to soil, of silence giving way to song. Hope Granger had been in the world for 6 weeks when the first patches of green appeared beyond. The edge of the woods, shy and stubborn, like the child herself. Inside the cabin, things had changed in ways Elias never could have imagined during the lonely winters of his past. His axe still hung on its peg. His boots still carried sap and mud. But the air was different. The fire now crackled for 3, and the house was filled with sound. Little coos, soft lullabies from Celine, the rhythmic creak of the cradle he had made with reverent hands. Hope had her mother's brow and her father's steady gaze. That truth settled something deep inside Elias that no accusation could ever shake. When she opened her blue eyes and looked at him. He saw no questions, only trust. She didn't care where she came from. She only knew she was warm, fed and loved. Celine recovered slowly, but with purpose. She moved about the cabin now with a grace born not only of healing, but of belonging. Her cheeks grew rosy again, her eyes clearer. She hummed when she worked, laughed when Hope reached for her hair, and kissed Elias on the cheek without hesitation. One bright morning, Elias found her outside, standing barefoot in the thawing grass, Hope nestled against her chest in a sling. "She loves the wind," Celine said, smiling down at the bundle. "I think she remembers the sounds from the womb, the trees, the air, your voice." Elias stepped beside them. "And she'll grow up knowing them well. She'll learn the name of every bird that nests out here. I'll show her how to split kindling, how to build things with her hands." Celine looked at him then, not just with affection but with certainty. "And I'll teach her how to sew her own coat, how to plant chamomile. We'll raise her on strength and gentleness in equal measure." They stood there a long while, the three of them as sunlight filtered through the trees. No one came down the trail anymore, no gossipers, no skeptics, no ghosts from the past. Whatever Stillwater thought of them now no longer mattered. The people who mattered were here, together, that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and washed the cabin in golden warmth. Elias brought a rocking chair onto the porch. Celine followed, Hope cradled against her chest in a blanket of her own making. Elias rocked slowly, the pine boards creaking in rhythm. Hope stirred, eyes wide in the fading light. Her small hand reached upward, grasping at the last rays of the day, like she was already dreaming of things just beyond her reach. "I used to think I was meant to be alone," Elias said quietly, "that the silence was safer than the risk." Celine leaned into him. "And now I know silence was just waiting for you." The wind picked up gently, rustling the branches like a lullaby. Inside, the hearth waited warm and steady, but the true fire now lived between them, fueled by kindness, defended by sacrifice, and carried forward in the steady breath of a baby girl named Hope. That spring, the forest whispered a new song. It wasn't the sound of a man surviving, it was the sound of a family beginning. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Souls of the Old West, and share your thoughts in the comments. And if you know someone who would love this tale of courage, healing, and new beginnings, send it their way. See you in the next story.